Ryan and Jessica, I know you guys have been collaborators since you were children, literally, right? How did this project find its way to you, and what interested you in making this movie? I know you're the big space nerd.
That's exactly right. Ryan and I have been best friends since we were little kids in Atlanta. And Ryan's always been a big space enthusiast and wanted to be an astronaut, but ended up in filmmaking. And we always knew we wanted to make a space film, and we had a few opportunities, but nothing really landed with us until this project. We had a dinner, and Film 45, Pete Berg's company, and Amblin, Steven Spielberg's company, had this idea and pitched it to us. And Ryan and I at this dinner just looked at each other and said, like, that this is the one. We knew it was the one. I mean, it's an amazing logline, you know. It's it's an adventure story of a robot supposed to live 90 days and live 15 years. And the logline got us hooked, but we still didn't really know what we were in for at that point. And we discovered so much more about the story and the weight of it along the way.
By the way, space enthusiast is so much nicer than space nerd.
Well, I do say nerd normally, and we are nerds, admittedly. Yeah. I was just joking about that a few minutes ago, actually. It's we always talk about nerding out. I mean, That's what this project was, you know, working with ILM, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and working with these amazing people who did such great work. Like, it was a pretty heavy, nerdy project, which was great.
And I'm, as a proud nerd, I will say, I mean that with affection. So, Ryan, when you heard this pitch, were you instantly, like, you knew you were doing it? You probably didn't have to convince her too much.
Yeah, I think we knew right away. We gave each other this look, like this is the one. But it was the beginning of a really unpredictable journey. And I think we thought the log line's great, and we were working with Amblin, and they brought in Industrial Light and Magic to us, and we thought, okay, we have this amazing way of taking the audience to Mars in a way that's never been done before through these visual effects. And then Jess got access to the archive that NASA had shot, which was almost 1,000 hours of footage. So usually we're verite filmmakers, meaning we're following something unfolding, but we thought even though this story, Opportunity, had already had her beginning, middle, and end, through that Earthbound story and the archival, and then the visual effects on Mars, which were going to be photoreal and based on all the real photographs and data, that we might be able to take the audience on that journey day by day, year by year, instead of it being retrospective. What we didn't know was who were the human beings that were going to be in the movie. And I think, if we're being honest, we thought that was going to be the biggest challenge. We had this preconceived notion that scientists and engineers maybe wouldn't be the most emotional storytellers, and we ended up being completely wrong. And Jess actually began pre-interviewing all of these people, including Jennifer and Doug, and everybody. You know, we only have 11 human beings in our film because you can only fit so many, but there were dozens of incredible people that we talked to who all had their own singular individual bond with this rover, their own anecdotes of how it went side by side in their life. And so really, I think the film became all about the humanity behind these rovers, because the rovers are just an extension of these human beings.
I mean, the people, the humans in this are so fascinating. And Jennifer and Doug, I'm curious, when you first heard about this project, is this the sort of thing that you would normally do, or was it specifically because this story was so special that you wanted to be a part of it?
Missions like these are very lucky in that they tend to get a lot of attention from the documentary business, from the TV business, from media in general, because they're cool, they're exciting, they're enticing, they make good, above the fold front page postcards and stuff like that. But the sort of stories that normally get told are the more traditional, this is how the rover was built, this is what it went and did, and this is what it found, roll credits. It's the rover's story as seen through the eyes of the people. I think when I first realized this was something a little different was when I realized it wasn't so much the story of the mission through the eyes of the people, it was the story of the people through the eyes of the rover. It was flipping the formula. And that's when I realized that it was going to probably fill this hole that some of us kind of on the deck of the good ship Opportunity as you went down, we had this kind of emotional hole because it ended really quickly. And whilst it was 6 months of trying to recover it, but you're left with this kind of emotional hole. You worked as a team on this thing. And in some respects, I think what this has done is patch that hole and serve as a tool that we can then pass on to other people to say, this is why we care about projects like this. This is what being on a project like this is all about.
Because people were probably on to the next project already and probably didn't really get a chance to mourn Oppy.
Yeah, in fact, I had been on to the next project and the next project and was doing Perseverance. at the time, but Opportunity was a legacy on which these other rovers were built. And as far as my interest in the film, as Doug said, there were lots of documentaries over the years that were done on the different missions and Mars rovers, and initially I didn't really have an idea that this was any different than those. And then they asked for some family pictures and more stories about us than stories about the science. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I think the thing that really strikes me being a team member of all these rovers, including Opportunity and Spirit, is just the uniqueness of all the people. Even though there are only 11 people in the film, it takes everyone with a unique skill, hundreds, thousands of people, to make those rovers work. And I felt like we sort of came up with this same thing with this documentary, where there's a pairing of people with unique skills and talents. And as an engineer, we're not always the best folks to tell our stories. And so that is what I really appreciated, was finding people who could get that story out of us in a way that maybe we couldn't tell it, and then tell it to the world such that anybody can watch this movie and be interested.
Blake, can you sort of talk about going into this? You know, did you have ideas of things that you wanted to lean into, or maybe you want to avoid? I think I read an interview where you said you were actually initially hesitant to use the piano because it's sort of a trope.
Well, not a trope. It's more of a no-no. Composers, like, if you're in space, you're not using a piano. You got to be big. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But I've been working with these two beautiful humans for 10 years now, and I happen to be at that dinner on the 12th where the whole project was pitched. And I, being we're going with nerd or enthusiast. Yeah, space nerd. Star Wars was the first thing that told 8-year-old me that even film composing was a thing. So we're sitting at this dinner, and they go, "What do you think?" I go, "What do you mean, what do you think? You just said space and Mars? We're doing this, right?" And Jessica said, "Well, what are you thinking? What do you hear?" And I said, "Well, we're gonna need an orchestra," which was cool because in a lot of our movies, there's no money, but this, from the very beginning stages, we all got to kind of throw in what we needed. So we began planning that, but then this idea came to me that, I mean, they're like children, the rovers. You know, hearing their stories through the whole thing, they're like these two fragile kids up there in cold, lonely space. And I just thought, you know, what's more lonely than just like one piano note? And that's how the score opens. So that was the idea.
And forgive me because music is not my area of expertise, but it feels like each of the rovers kind of has their own theme, and maybe even their own instruments.
Yeah, they have, I mean, very different personalities, right? So they got their own themes. Doug didn't get his own personal theme, but
Yet.
But what I did do with this movie is I felt like I had two roles. One was to make you, as Mark will say, make you care about these boxes of bolts and wires. So it was this fine line of how much do you push the emotion, because at some point you're like, it's just a bunch of box of wires, and then if you push it too far, you're like, come on, it's just a box of wires. So we were constantly riding this line of balancing the emotion. And then the other thing for me is these real humans, these people who care. So Doug has this great line in the movie where he says, you only get this kind of experience, this kind of adventure once. Mm. And I thought, wow, you know, this guy, before I'd ever met him, and Jennifer, they're going to see this movie. You know, with narratives, those characters don't exist, so they're never going to see the movie. But they're going to see this movie, so there's a sense of, burden, I guess, to make them experience the film how they experienced the adventure.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure now that I think about it.
I mean, it's still just music, so.
We like it, no worries.
Mark, I love that you literally just won an Oscar for creating sound on a fictional planet in Dune. How do you design the sound for Mars? How do you know what Mars sounds like? Where do you even begin?
Well, when I started the project, I only had a sort of a cursory understanding of the meteorology of Mars. We knew we wanted Mars to sound like something that made sense for what we understand about its climate. So the first sound I attempted to design was the atmosphere of Mars. And in the middle of that adventure, we found out from NASA that Perseverance, the rover that's currently on Mars, had actually captured sounds on Mars. It's the first time microphones have been placed on a robot or a rover like this, and I got to hear what an alien planet sounds like. So, among other things, I took those actual sounds of the sound of Mars and turned that into an immersive soundscape that we use every time we're on the surface of the planet. Sort of apropos of what Blake was saying, I felt that same burden because I didn't want Doug and Jennifer or anyone else to see this movie and hear sounds of Oppy because they knew what those sounds were like, and have that not be the sonic equivalent of photorealistic. I wanted it to be audio accurate. So I also had the good opportunity to go to JPL and record the sounds of the remaining Oppy chassis. It didn't have a nav cam on it in the Mars yard. So I captured the sounds of motors and wheels and servos, and as it traversed a terrain that's been built to mimic the surface of Mars. So in so many ways, I felt the pressure of the documentary to be accurate and be honest and truthful with sound, unlike a movie like Dune, where we have the latitude to do really kind of anything. You know, when you see things you've never seen before, you should arguably hear things you've never heard before. This felt different, and that's an additional burden that I don't usually have in narrative filmmaking.
Well, I want to remind everyone this movie is actually streaming now on Amazon Prime, so you can watch it again. I want to thank you all so much for being here, and again, congratulations on a beautiful movie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming here on a Sunday morning.